Guys, I can take a dump in a bag. It's the only bag of my feces in the entire world. Does it make it valuable?
Okay, first question. Did he take the dump in the bag and then let the bag of write the script for this video? Because I've never heard such bullshit come out of a human being's mouth. Listen, I usually kind of go easy on these guys when I do these takedowns. Even that UK professor who was a total moron, I destroyed all his arguments, but actually went pretty easy on him. Go watch that one if you haven't seen it yet. But this dude picked the wrong day to pop up on my feed, so he's about to get eviscerated. I don't know if you've ever seen a human man get filleted and eaten alive. Verbally, of course. But stick around, because today's your lucky day. So he calls himself the everything money guy, so he knows everything about money, right? Well, except for what it is, anything about its history, or how it evolved, or anything about the properties of money, what makes something money, or of course, how it may evolve in the future. And apparently, he wouldn't know a viable commodity money if it walked up and bit him in the ass. So like I said, I'm going to tear this guy to shreds. This video might end up being 8 hours long. I haven't even watched the whole thing yet. I could only get like 4 minutes in before I said, all right, we got to take this guy down. So you get to see my raw, unfiltered reaction in real time as we debunk every old, regurgitated piece of FUD that he's going to pull back out that's been debunked for about 15 years already. Let's see if he comes up with anything new, creative, or interesting. Here, let's go.
Bitcoin. It's called a digital gold. It's called the future of money, and it's a hedge against inflation. But what if I told you that Bitcoin might actually be the biggest financial scam of our time? Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the crypto ecosystem, exposing the fraud, manipulation, and speculative hype driving Bitcoin, and why you should think twice before investing. Bitcoin's story starts with 3 key selling points that makes everybody's panties get all excited. A limited supply of 21 million coins, decentralization of a currency, and freedom from government control. This was the premise behind Bitcoin and why it would be a great changer for how we interact with each other financially. But when you strip away all the buzzwords, here's the reality. Bitcoin has no intrinsic value,
First of all, he has not yet said why any of those 3 things aren't true. They all were true at the beginning and they all are still true. We'll see if he thinks he has some reason why he's going to go into why these things aren't true, but he didn't bother to say why they're not true.
Bitcoin has no intrinsic value, no earnings, no dividends.
Of course, they always start there. No intrinsic value, earnings, dividends. Okay, I'll get to all 3. Intrinsic value is the first one. There's no such thing as intrinsic value. You ever heard of something called the subjective theory of value? All value is subjective. Any object or good that has value, that value is assigned to it by human beings. There's no such thing as objective value of any given thing. In economic terms, the only value placed on something is by a buyer and a seller agreeing on a price for a transaction to take place. This is only looking at things through a traditional investing, Keynesian economics, fiat lens. Of course, I understand that there's this term called intrinsic value that they use in value investing, where they say, oh, these are calculations we do to determine the objective measure of what an asset is worth based on future cash flow and risk and growth potential. Well, guess what? There's multiple ways to calculate the intrinsic value. So just because you're using a discounted cash flow analysis model doesn't mean that that's the actual intrinsic value of the asset. There is no such thing as intrinsic value. All value is subjective. Every human being or set of human beings places a value on any good or thing. But we won't go too far down that rabbit hole because I know it'd break their brains.
If you think it has intrinsic value, you are going to lose a lot of money in some way, shape, or form. Maybe not on Bitcoin, but on some other thing.
What does that mean? If you think Bitcoin has intrinsic value, you're going to lose a lot of money on something else that's not Bitcoin? That makes no sense. But we'll get farther into this as we go along. Even if you want to give them there is such thing as intrinsic value. I'm going to explain to you why a commodity good becomes money. What are the specific properties that a commodity good needs to have to become money? Insofar as a commodity good has intrinsic value as money, all it takes is a certain set of properties to make that thing monetized.
No earnings, no dividends.
And they always do the no earnings, no dividends, as if everything you can invest in or every single thing that has value in the entire world has to have earnings and dividends. Of course not. There's plenty of stocks that don't even have dividends. There's plenty of stocks that aren't even profitable. There's stocks that lose money and don't pay a dividend, but are still valuable. How do you explain that? By the way, how do you explain gold? Why has gold been considered the #1 inflation hedge, the #1 store of value for, 5,000, 10,000 years? It's a shiny yellow rock. It has no cash flows. It has no earnings. How do you explain the fact that gold is considered a store of value? Could it be that gold has certain properties that made it useful as commodity money? And that if something has those properties, then it has inherent value as money? And that if that's true of gold, that could also be true of something else? What a weird idea. Quick pause just to say that if you're liking this video, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment and tell me either why I'm right or leave some cope in the comments and tell me why you think I'm wrong.
Its entire worth depends on people believing it's worth something more tomorrow than today. You're hoping that you wake up tomorrow and somebody else says, I will pay you more for that. So
again, how is that not true of gold? If you believe that, that's what's true of Bitcoin, How is that not true of gold? No cash flow, no earnings. Its entire value is based on the fact that you'll wake up tomorrow and you think someone else is going to pay you more for your gold. Why has it been the number one store of value? The thing that kings and emperors and empires fought wars over, and that governments and central banks hoard to this day. Like, I guess they're all just hoping that somebody will wake up the next day and pay them more money for it. But they never sell it. Why is that? They just put it in a vault or stick it in Fort Knox and leave it there, and they never sell it. Just hoping that it'll go up in value. That's so strange. I wonder if anyone's ever thought about why that is or studied why that might be the case.
I might sit there and say, well, you've said that before. Everybody keeps saying that it keeps going up in value. That's what happens during hype. Look at the tulips back in the 1600s. Why did those keep going up in value?
They always do the tulips. This is so stupid. That's strange. It went spiked within 1 year period. It spiked and came all the way back down. How weird. Let me see something real quick. That's so strange. It seems like Bitcoin went up and then maybe it came back down. And then over the course of 16 years, well, you can't even see the spikes down here. Oh, there they are. Oh, went up, came down, went up. Oh, it just keeps going up. What? That's weird. The lows keep getting higher and the highs keep getting higher. That's so weird. Over 16 years, it just kept going. Wait, let's go down to the log chart. Oh, wow, that's amazing. It just keeps going up and to the right. How strange. So it doesn't look like that, I guess.
Why do those keep going up in value? If Bitcoin feels familiar, it's because we've seen these speculative bubbles many times before, and we will never stop seeing them. Think about cannabis stocks like Tilray, which skyrocketed to $300 in 2018 before crashing to $1.41, a 99.5% loss.
Oh, look at that again. Did it come back? Oh, it just went up and went down and it never came back. And what does cannabis stocks have to do with Bitcoin? Again, that just shows you the lens through which he sees these things. He can only see it as like Bitcoin's like a stock. And he clearly can't see that this, over 16 years, looks different than this.
What do these bubbles have in common? A story that's too good to resist and prices that can't be justified. But more importantly, human envy and FOMO. People can't stand being the ones missing out on the skyrocketing price. Now, I realize we're doing this video during a time when Bitcoin cannot stop going up. So, of course, you can look at this going, Paul, you're wrong. I could be wrong. But let's understand what an investment is. Because a lot of people say I'm investing in Bitcoin, and I always write immediately speculating in Bitcoin. And guys, there are other things that people speculate into that I've done. Artwork, baseball cards. These things are all speculative. Why? They don't create anything. They don't generate anything.
So is it just a semantic argument where you're just super pedantic about it and you're like, oh, it's only an investment if it generates cash flow? Because again, you can buy a stock that doesn't produce dividends. So then what? It's just greater fool theory, just hoping it'll go up and I can sell it to some other idiot tomorrow. How does he define gold? So it's gold is speculation too. So the greatest store of value in the history of time. By definition, he would have to say gold is speculation too. Gold is not an investment.
You buy stock of a company that's generating cash. If the market went away for that company tomorrow, you would still have access and a claim to the free cash flow in the bank account and the assets of the business.
If the market for the company goes away tomorrow and the company has no more earnings and it goes bankrupt, you as a common stockholder don't have access to any of that crap. You're the last one on the totem pole to get paid back after all the other creditors get paid back, and you're not going to get anything. You hold a share of the stock goes to zero. You have no claims on anything. That makes no sense.
And until the stock market opened again, let's say 20 years down the road, that business would continue to get more valuable as it drove revenue and profit.
Wait, is he saying if the stock market closed for 20 years and then you waited and the stock market reopened, and while the stock market was closed, you as a shareholder would have access to the earnings and the cash? That makes no sense.
But let's take away the value of Bitcoin. How are you going to interact? How do you know what your Bitcoin is worth before you buy something? Support.
What do you mean take away the value of Bitcoin? How do you know what it's worth? You know what it's worth because there's a 24/7, 365 market of people buying and selling Bitcoins. And again, the subjective theory of value, human beings determine the value of what something is worth. The free market determines that. It's not an objective value that's calculated by this guy and some discounted cash flow model. That's not how value works. That's not how prices work. The free market decides. So if you want to just ignore the fact that the free market is telling you that this thing has value, then you can do that, but that doesn't make you right.
Others claim that Bitcoin could one day replace fiat currency or rival gold as a store of value, but there's no clear roadmap or economic foundation supporting these claims as of now.
But there's no roadmap because Bitcoin is not a company. The fact they're saying there's no economic foundation, There absolutely is an economic foundation. And again, the everything money guy who doesn't understand money, doesn't know what makes something money, doesn't know where money came from in the first place, and doesn't know how it evolved or what the properties are of money. And I'll explain it to you.
And people who try to say that, well, what about gold? Yeah, what about gold? Gold has thousands and thousands and thousands of years of evidence that it has other uses besides just a backing of currency. Now,
Okay, here we go. So he thinks gold only has value today because gold was previously already valuable, but he doesn't bother to go back and wonder why gold became valuable in the first place. Why did people pick up a shiny yellow rock and go, this is valuable? Why did that happen? And he thinks gold only had value because it had other uses besides it being a backing of currency. They always say this. Gold is valuable because it's used in jewelry and it's used in electronics. Well, it had value before it was used in electronics and had any modern industrial uses. So if you go back more than like 150 years before the Industrial Revolution, gold didn't have any industrial uses. So why was it valuable then? Oh, it was useful as jewelry. Tons of things are useful as jewelry. That doesn't make something a store of value. What the everything money guy also clearly doesn't understand is what a monetary premium is. Gold has industrial uses and it has jewelry uses. And that accounts for probably about 10 to 20% of gold's price. The rest of the price of gold, call it 80%, is what's called monetary premium because human beings use gold as a store of value. Meaning if human beings did not use gold as a store of value, its price would be 80 to 90% lower. So by definition, that whole, oh, it's worth $3,000 an ounce or whatever, yeah, 90% of that is because people are using it as a store of value. If its monetary premium collapsed and it was no longer used as a store of value, its value would tank by 90% because the only demand for it would be for industrial uses and jewelry uses. So gold has that high value because it has a monetary premium, because it's used as a store of value. And again, Mr. Money Guy has never bothered to go back in history and understand why gold became valuable in the first place. What is a commodity money? What gives something value? Why does it have inherent value? When you study it, the answer is actually super simple. Commodity monies developed in human societies through a free market competition of different goods being used as money. What Mr. Money Guy doesn't know, but if you study it for 10 minutes, you will know, is that money is essentially a technology that human beings developed. Money serves three functions. It serves a function as a medium of exchange, a unit of account, and a store of value. Lots of different human beings and different groups used lots of different things as commodity money over time. And it turns out that for a commodity to become monetized, to be useful as money, for human beings to converge on it and start using it as money, it has to possess certain properties. And they're very specific. The properties are, it has to be durable. Obviously, it's got to last through time. Tulips aren't good money because they wilt and die. It's got to be portable. You got to be able to carry it around, move it around to use it as a medium of exchange. Obvious. It's got to be divisible. You have to be able to subdivide it into smaller units and recombine it into larger units. It has to be fungible, meaning one unit is the same as another unit. You can exchange one unit for the other and they both have the same value. It has to be verifiable, which essentially means it's easy for me to verify that the money is real. So if I transact with someone else or someone gives me a gold coin, it's easy for me to tell that that's the real thing. And lastly, it has to be scarce. It has to be difficult to produce more of because you have an existing stock of the amount of money in circulation. It has to be hard for anyone to grow that stock by introducing new quantities of the commodity. Well, why is that? Well, because as we know, expanding the supply of money is inflation. If there's an existing supply of the money and I hold a certain amount, that means I hold a percentage of the total overall supply. But if the overall supply gets larger, the existing stock of money grows, I'm now holding a smaller percentage of the total overall supply. Therefore, I've been diluted and my holdings of the money have been devalued. So if a commodity fulfills the first five, then the last one, scarcity, becomes the most important one. And that explains why different human beings use different things as commodity money over time. But in a free market competition of different monies, the harder money always won. So if one society was using shells or beads or tobacco or copper or aluminum, all things that people did use as money at one point, if that weaker money encountered the harder money in the free market, the harder money would always win. And what winning means is the holders of the weaker currency see all the value go to zero against the harder currency. So there's actual examples in history of Native Americans who use glass beads as currency, as money. European settlers who used metallic monies. The Europeans came over when they realized that the Native Americans were using glass beads and that back in Europe, they had more advanced technology and they could produce the glass beads en masse at scale and shipped them over to America and used them to buy things from the Native Americans, they not only extracted all the valuable goods from the Native American society, they also inflated the supply of the beads such that the beads became worthless. So that's just one example. But every commodity money that was used that wasn't gold went to zero against gold. So the harder money always wins, and monies converge onto one. So the best one will win, and the other ones will see the value go to zero against the harder money. So this is the number one thing that Mr. Money Guy and all the people who say these things do not understand. And yes, this is the part where I tell you Bitcoin was engineered to be digital gold. Why do we call it digital gold? It has those same properties. It's durable, portable, divisible, fungible, verifiable, and scarce. And in a digital world, it's much more portable than gold. It's much more verifiable than gold. It's more divisible than gold. And it's more scarce than gold because the supply is capped at 21 million. And that means, yes, you guessed it, on a long enough time horizon, everything else, including gold, goes to zero against Bitcoin. Because like I just told you, as history demonstrates, when a money comes up against something that is a better, harder money, the weaker money will go to zero on a long enough time horizon against the harder money. Holders of the harder money will see the purchasing power of their holdings increase forever as it sucks all the value out of every other store of value that's weaker, that's less scarce. So now you understand why Bitcoin is not a tech company. It's not a stock. It's not real estate. It doesn't need cash flows. It doesn't need dividends. It doesn't need earnings. It is a superior money, a superior store of value designed to have the properties of perfect money and perfect finality of scarcity. That is all it needs to have inherent value as money. And history shows you that that is all it needs to have more and more adoption, more and more people using it as a store of value. And again, this is why they cannot understand that it's not just a speculative bubble that will pop and go back down to zero. It is a virus, a monetary parasite, sucking the lifeblood out of every other monetary good and store of value. That is what gold had been for 5,000, 10,000 years. Again, why did governments and empires and central banks hoard gold? And even though it had no cash flows and no earnings, they didn't wake up the next day hoping they could sell it to some other guy for more money. They just held it forever. They don't sell it. That is what is happening with Bitcoin and will continue to happen. Bitcoin will suck the value out of every other store of value. You don't need to wake up tomorrow and sell it for fiat, some debasing piece of paper money that governments can print more of at will. And again, dilute the existing stock, which I just explained to you is what makes weaker money. So in nominal terms, in fiat terms, Bitcoin can and will continue to go up forever. The flip side of that is all prices fall forever in Bitcoin terms. So you just got your foundational rant to explain to you how this works. Now you understand everything you didn't know to know why the guy's wrong. But he's got like 20 more minutes, so let's see what else he's going to go with.
Now, we don't use it to back our currency anymore, which has led to massive inflation. But how is Bitcoin the solution for that when Bitcoin itself is valued in the very dollars it wants to replace?
What is valued in the very dollars it wants to replace? What does that even mean? I've seen them say this before online. Well, how can Bitcoin replace dollars when it's valued in dollars? Oh, checkmate. It's like, you can denominate anything in anything else. Bitcoin is also valued in yen or yuan or pesos, or you can put a Bitcoin against gold chart, Bitcoin against Ethereum, Bitcoin against the S&P. You can value it in terms of anything you want to value it in. So you can denominate anything in terms of anything else. And again, it doesn't matter because the nominal valuation of Bitcoin in dollars is just a number. The more dollars they print, the more Bitcoin goes up in dollar terms. Eventually, it could be worth $100 trillion. It happened in Zimbabwe. They printed like $100 trillion note. It's just a number. It doesn't mean anything because they're devaluing the currency to zero.
It was created originally to keep transactions away from the government. Guys, you think the government's ever going to allow that? If the US government ever thought that people were getting away with defrauding them by using Bitcoin, all the government has to do is say, Bitcoin's gone. It's done.
So guys like this just say that. He just says, oh, the government will just say Bitcoin's gone. First of all, the US government just announced the creation of a strategic Bitcoin reserve. So I don't think the government's banning Bitcoin. Doesn't seem to be headed that way, does it? Even though that was the number one piece of FUD for like 16 years. The government's going to ban it. And the US government's not banning it. Oh, and by the way, even if the US government did ban it, there's about 195 other countries in the world. So every country would have to ban it all at the exact same time. And what he seems to not understand, that's the whole point of Bitcoin. That still would not stop it. It's peer-to-peer. You cannot stop it. Every government in the world could ban Bitcoin. I could still send Bitcoin to anyone in the world who has a Bitcoin address. That would not stop me. Despite him just hand-waving it and saying that Bitcoin would be gone, that is precisely why it was created, because he's 100% wrong, and that's actually not how it works at all.
Whenever I hear people talk about the merits of Bitcoin, I say, great, tell me how you value Bitcoin. And they list all these things about Bitcoin. And I say, okay, you said a lot of qualitative things, which is wonderful. Now let's change the price of Bitcoin by adding 2 zeros. Are all your statements still true? Yes, they are. Okay, let's take 3 zeros away. Are all your statements still true? Yes. And it's not an investment.
What does that mean? Literally, what does that mean? First of all, subjective theory of value. The market determines the price. Right now, what people are willing to exchange one Bitcoin for, a certain amount of dollars, that's the price. But those of us who understand the value of Bitcoin and everything I just told you a second ago, don't sell it for that. Price is determined at the margin. So price is not determined by hodlers, people who are holding Bitcoin and not willing to sell it. It's determined by the very small number of people at the margin who are trading, buying, selling, jumping in and out, using leverage. They determine the daily market price, the fiat denominated exchange rate of how many dollars it's quote unquote valued at today. That's just a temporary fiat denominated exchange rate. And I believe my Bitcoin is worth more than that. So I don't sell it for that. I believe my Bitcoin is worth more than any amount of dollars because, again, it's a harder money. Why would I want a piece of paper that a government can print more of by the trillion whenever it decides to, when I hold something that has all the properties that make it perfect commodity money and it has a fixed supply? So I know that forever the amount that I hold will forever be a fixed percentage of the total overall supply. That's why we hodl. That's why those of us who understand it and know its value aren't selling it for some random number of fiat. But the argument that, if it's you add 2 zeros or take away 2 zeros, does that change the value? And if not, then it's not an investment. If you took 2 zeros and added it to the fiat denominated exchange rate for gold, or took them away from the fiat denominated exchange rate for gold, does that change anything about gold's inherent value or the reason people value it? Of course not. I just did a whole entire video on this concept, actually, by the way. Go watch it, about how the reason Bitcoiners love it when the price goes down is because we understand what we hold and the actual value of it. Therefore, when it goes down in fiat denominated terms for unrelated reasons, we see that as an opportunity to acquire more. And we're excited about it because there's an information asymmetry going on, that we understand what we hold and the market clearly is reacting to unrelated factors that haven't changed the fundamental underlying reasons why Bitcoin has value.
Because if I look at a company like Microsoft, and I name all the reasons why it could be a good or bad investment, if I add 2 zeros to it, it becomes a bad investment immediately. Those statements aren't all true. If I take 2 zeros away, those statements are even better.
Again, because you only see it through the lens of discounted cash flow analysis and valuing it at same as a stock. You're the everything money guy, but you don't understand money.
I hear people say the fundamentals there's limited supply. Guys, I can take a dump in a bag. It's the only bag of my feces in the entire world. Does it make it valuable? Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. Oh, it's maybe. He's just holding out that maybe it could be valuable. Again, I can't believe you want to call yourself the everything money guy and you don't even understand the first thing about what money is. That rant I just went on, prove to me why that's not true. Those properties that I mentioned that make something a store of value or a commodity money, if you can figure out a way to prove to me that that's not true, again, that's why intrinsic value or inherent value doesn't exist. Gold's just a shiny yellow rock. But it turns out that human beings want to use commodities as this technology we call money. And it turns out that we figured out the best way for something to fulfill that technology as money is to have those properties. So the free market determined that when one good comes up against another good, and one of them better fulfills those properties and is more scarce, the better money will win. It just turns out that that's the way it is. History tells you that. I didn't make it up. So therefore, insofar as inherent value exists, all a commodity has to have inherent value as money is those properties. The harder the money, the better, and the harder money wins. I've read and watched and listened to as many of these anti-Bitcoin guys as I possibly can, and I've never once seen them A, understand that argument, but B, be able to refute it. Because it's just fact, it's just human nature, it's just free market, it's just history. There is no argument to say why that's not true. So you have to quibble with the properties and say that Bitcoin doesn't have those properties for some reason or another, but then you're just coping.
Because you have to have a use for that. And you might sit there and say, Paul, you're missing it. There's so much use for Bitcoin. Guys, I own 8 businesses upstairs. I own 1,000 apartments. I own luxury rentals around the world. Not one time ever in all of these things I've done has anybody said to me, Paul, do you accept Bitcoin? Not once.
The fiat maximalist guy who hates Bitcoin, I'm going to go ask him if he accepts Bitcoin to pay my rent. Of course, we know that Bitcoin has not reached full global adoption for every transaction on Earth yet. I just did a video on this, by the way. Go watch it. The properties of money are store of value, medium of exchange, and unit of account. Bitcoin has the ability to fulfill all three. Just because it doesn't today fill all three at a global scale after 16 years of existence, by the way, does not mean that it can't or won't. It still works perfectly well as a medium of exchange. If someone came to him and said, I want to pay you in Bitcoin, and he wasn't such a smug fiat maximalist, he could say, okay. And then within 2 seconds, he could have a Bitcoin address and accept Bitcoin and use it as a medium of exchange. There's nothing stopping him. There's no reason why he can't do that. He just doesn't want to. But the fact that he doesn't want to, or that no one's yet asked him if they can pay in Bitcoin, doesn't invalidate its medium of exchange capabilities. Again, go watch my video on that, and you'll also understand why adoption of a commodity money goes specifically in the direction of, first, it's a store of value. Then once it's widely used and recognized as a store of value, it starts becoming more widely adopted as a medium of exchange, which we do see. There are people transacting in Bitcoin. There are places in the world you can buy things in Bitcoin. But to expect the whole world to be accepting it after 16 years is stupid. And it just takes time. It goes through the store of value phase, then through the medium of exchange phase, then through the unit of account phase. Go watch my video on that. It explains it more in depth.
There was a lot of fraud and speculation on the internet. Didn't mean the internet was a fraud. And that's why I always say crypto in its current essence.
Guys like this, by the way, would have said the internet was a fraud at the beginning. Like Paul Krugman, who said that the internet's effect on the economy will be no greater than the fax machine. That would have been this guy.
Will not succeed. It could change. If the US government came out and said, we're making Bitcoin our official currency. But my guess is then that the price of the currency will still drop in the long run. Why? Because it has to equate out and there's too much euphoria around it. There's too much fraud right now.
It doesn't have to equate out. What does that mean? So adoption can continue, which means more people will want to buy it. And so more people will spend more money to acquire it. And also, because fiat currencies are not fixed, the supply of fiat monies will keep increasing. The nominal fiat denominated value of Bitcoin can keep going up forever because governments keep printing new fiat money into existence. All right, I was just editing this video and it ended up being super long, so I'm splitting it up into part 1 and part 2. So subscribe to the channel because part 2 is going to come out in like 2 days. In part 2, he gets even worse. The hypocrisy gets worse. The crypto BS gets worse. He somehow manages to give legacy finance and all the scams that go on there a total free pass compared to anything that happens in crypto. If you're watching this more than 2 days later, I'll put it right here. So click here or hit the link in the description. Don't forget Bitcoin's inevitable.